When struggling law student and kind-hearted waiter Daniel offers a free cup of coffee to an elderly woman on a stormy morning, he doesn't realize he's serving a reclusive billionaire in disguise. Daniel Moreno, 26 years old, with warm hazel eyes and messy dark brown hair, balanced his worn apron over his button-up shirt as he wiped down a booth at the small cafe in Bridgeport. His smile was kind, even when his body ached from juggling 2 shifts and law classes. He was lean, tall, with tired eyes but a heart full of quiet resilience. His olive-toned skin and faint stubble gave him an air of a man much older than his years. Hardened by the responsibilities of raising his younger sister Mariah and tending to his mother Carmen, who had been battling lupus for years, rain tapped against the cafe windows like a soft lullaby as Daniel glanced out toward the street. Few customers came in this early, especially on a stormy morning. That was until she walked in, stooped slightly, wrapped in a threadbare gray trench coat, her silver hair damp under a wide-brimmed hat. Daniel offered his usual smile as the old woman approached the counter. She clutched a weathered leather handbag close to her chest, her blue eyes scanning the pastry case before settling on a plain cup of coffee. "One small coffee, please," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly, not from age but perhaps from uncertainty. "That'll be $1.75, Daniel replied, wiping his hands on a towel. Her fingers fumbled with the clasp of her bag. After a few awkward seconds she looked up with a flush of embarrassment. I must have left my wallet at home. "I'm sorry," Daniel shrugged and gently pushed the steaming paper cup toward her. "Don't worry about it, it's on me." She blinked, surprised. "But you don't know me," he smiled again. "That doesn't matter. You look like you need a warm drink more than I need. $1.75 today." She stared at him for a long moment, the silence between them warm rather than awkward. "Thank you," she said, wrapping her hands around the cup. "That's very kind. It's just coffee," Daniel said, turning back to clean the counter. But he felt something shift, like the start of a ripple he couldn't quite see yet. For the next week the woman returned each morning, always ordering the same plain coffee. Some days she paid in change. Other days Daniel simply waved her off with a smile. He didn't pry into her life, nor did she offer any details. Still, their quiet exchanges grew warmer. She started to sit at the booth by the window, watching the rain, reading an old leather-bound book or just sipping slowly. One morning Daniel finally asked, "What's your name?" She looked up from her cup, thoughtful. "Call me Iris." "Iris," he repeated. "It suits you." She tilted her head, eyes dancing with amusement. "And you're the waiter who gives away coffee." "Daniel?" he chuckled. "Daniel Moreno, waiter by day, law student by night." That was the first time she smiled, not politely, but deeply, as if something inside her stirred awake. He noticed then the grace in her weathered features, the gentle pride in her posture, and the sadness that never quite left her eyes. They didn't need much conversation. The silence between them was comforting. It reminded Daniel of family dinners before his father died, when love was quiet and unconditional. What Daniel didn't know was that Iris was no ordinary pensioner. Her real name was Margaret Everley, a reclusive billionaire widow who hadn't been seen in public for over a decade. She lived in a historic estate north of the city, surrounded by antiques, ivy-covered walls, and too many memories. Her late husband, Charles Everley, had been a magnate in shipping and real estate. After his death, Margaret withdrew from the spotlight, turning to philanthropy and investing quietly in orphanages, scholarships, and community hospitals. But in all her wealth, Margaret found herself growing lonelier with each passing year. The people who approached her often wanted something: donations, endorsements, connections. The cafe had been a spontaneous stop during a morning walk, one she hadn't expected to repeat, until she met Daniel. There was something about him that reminded her of Charles. Not his looks but his heart. His kindness was unperformed, sincere. It made her curious, and in that curiosity bloomed a small but persistent longing, for connection, not transaction. Margaret wasn't looking for love or friendship, at least not at first, but Daniel's compassion planted something unexpected in her: hope. One night, Daniel returned home soaked from a downpour, exhausted from double shifts and night classes. Their apartment was small, just 2 bedrooms and a kitchen with a flickering bulb. His mother was curled on the couch, a blanket over her legs, her breathing shallow. His sister Mariah, 14, greeted him with a hug and a quiet, "Mom's fever" came back. Daniel's heart sank. The hospital bills were piling up. His tuition was overdue. He had already sold his guitar, postponed dental work, and skipped meals. He was hanging by threads, just trying to keep his mother comfortable and his sister in school. And yet every morning he still greeted Iris with warmth and patience, never showing her the weight he carried. She noticed the shadows under his eyes growing darker, the slight tremble in his hands when he poured her coffee. One morning when he nearly dropped the carafe from fatigue, she gently reached out. "You're not sleeping, are you?" Daniel laughed it off. "I'm fine, it's just life." Margaret stared at him long after he walked away. That night she sat in her parlor, surrounded by oil paintings and silence, and made a decision that would change both their lives forever. It was early. The cafe had just opened and Margaret, Iris, was already seated by the window waiting. Daniel brought her coffee with a sleepy smile. "You beat me here today." She didn't respond at first. Then, with both hands wrapped around the cup, she said, "What would you do if you could wipe your debt clean?" He blinked. "I'd think I was dreaming," she nodded. "What if I offered you a way out, a strange offer maybe, but a real one?" Daniel laughed uneasily. "Like what?" Margaret looked directly at him. "Marry me." His smile faded. "I'm not asking for romance," she continued. "Or anything inappropriate, just a partnership. You'll have financial security and in return I'll have company. Someone who sees me. Not the name, not the fortune, just me." Daniel was stunned. The silence stretched until the sound of the espresso machine broke it. "You're serious?" he whispered. Margaret nodded. "Very." He stared at her, the woman he'd served for weeks, the woman he thought was just lonely. And he realized he had no idea who she really was, but something in her eyes told him this wasn't madness, it was loneliness and hope and maybe something else. Daniel didn't sleep that night. He lay awake in his creaky bed, staring at the cracked ceiling, his thoughts a hurricane of questions. Who was she, really? What kind of person makes such an offer? And more importantly, what kind of man even considers it? By dawn he was still uncertain. But he knew this much. His mother needed care, his sister deserved a future. And he was drowning. No lifeboat, no relief in sight. When he returned to the cafe, Margaret sat waiting, sipping her usual black coffee. She wore a neatly pressed wool coat that somehow made her look both regal and fragile. Daniel sat across from her for the first time. "I'll do it," he said softly, "but only if we agree. It's not about appearances, it's about respect." Her lips curved in the faintest smile. "That's all I want." They shook hands like business partners, though both felt something neither could name. They married in a courthouse on the edge of town beneath flickering fluorescent lights and the scent of stale paper. There were no guests, just a bored clerk, a silver ring and an exchange of vows spoken more like terms than promises. Margaret wore a deep green dress with a pearl brooch. Daniel wore his best shirt, ironed twice. He tried not to think about how strange it all was. She was 72, he was 26. Their handshake had led to a lifetime vow. Afterward she handed him an envelope. Inside was a deed to a modest apartment near the university, a check to clear his debts and prepaid medical care for his mother. "This doesn't mean you owe me," she said. "It just means you're free." Daniel swallowed the knot in his throat. "Thank you, Margaret," she smiled. "Now we're officially on a first-name basis." They moved into a two-story house Margaret had purchased discreetly in the suburbs. Daniel lived in the guest suite. Margaret insisted they maintain their independence. Their life became a strange routine: morning coffee in the garden, evening chess games, quiet dinners with no need for small talk. She read classic novels by the fire. He studied case law at the dining table. They existed side by side, not as lovers but as companions. At first it was awkward. Daniel didn't know whether to call her my wife or my friend. Margaret didn't know whether to interfere or give space. But over time something soft grew between them. She laughed at his dry jokes. He brewed her tea without asking. They began to learn the rhythms of each other's silences. It wasn't romance, but it was something real. One Sunday, Daniel found Margaret kneeling in the backyard garden, trimming a wild rosebush. Her gray hair glinted in the sunlight, and for a moment she looked younger. Timeless. "Need help?" he asked. She handed him the shears wordlessly. As they worked, she shared memories, how she and Charles had planted roses each spring, how she once dreamed of opening a public garden but feared being recognized. That life, she said, was golden and lonely. Daniel listened, his hands stained with dirt. "Do you regret it?" Margaret shook her head. "Only that I waited so long to be seen." He paused, looking at her hands, wrinkled but steady. "You are now." Their eyes met. No pretense, no performance, just truth. Eventually, Daniel told his mother and sister about the marriage. Carmen was stunned. Mariah thought it was a joke. But when Margaret came for dinner and cooked a rose con pollo in Carmen's kitchen, the tension melted. She joked with Mariah about teenage rebellion and helped Carmen with her knitting. After dinner, Carmen whispered to Daniel, "She has kind eyes." "She does," he said quietly. From that day forward, Margaret became part of their small family. Not as a benefactor, but as a presence. She joined birthdays, attended doctor's appointments, and even watched Mariah's school play. For the first time in years, Daniel felt like he wasn't carrying everything alone. One evening, Daniel returned home to find Margaret slumped in her armchair, pale and shaking. Her cup of tea lay spilled on the rug. He rushed her to the hospital. The diagnosis, a minor stroke. She would recover, but she needed rest, monitoring, and medication. Daniel never left her side. He read to her from her favorite novels, brought her meals, and massaged her hands when they trembled. "You didn't sign up for this," she whispered one night. He looked at her, eyes rimmed red. "I didn't sign up for a lot of things, but I'm here," and he meant it. When news of their marriage leaked, tabloids erupted. Young waiter marries reclusive billionaire, love or fortune, scandal or secret romance. Paparazzi camped outside the house. Students whispered at Daniel's university. Old friends called, asking questions with curiosity soaked in judgment. Margaret watched it all with a calm detachment. "Let them talk, we know what's real," Daniel struggled. "But what if people don't understand? Then let them misunderstand," she said. "We didn't do this for them." And for the first time, Daniel understood. Love wasn't always romantic. It was being known, protected, respected, even when the world scoffed. One night by the fireplace, Daniel asked, "Do you ever wish we met when I was older, or you were younger?" Margaret thought for a long while. "I wish we didn't need circumstances to bring us together, but I don't regret this." He nodded slowly. "I don't either." They sat in silence, two souls not defined by age or expectation, but by shared grace. And in that silence, Daniel realized he loved her, not with fireworks or passion, but with steadiness, loyalty, depth, the kind of love people rarely speak of but always long for. As the seasons turned, their life settled into a kind of peace. Margaret's health stabilized with careful monitoring, and Daniel managed to graduate law school, thanks to night classes and her unshakable encouragement. They celebrated with a quiet dinner at home. Margaret made lemon risotto, and Daniel surprised her with a rare first-edition book of poetry she'd once mentioned. When she opened it, she laughed and said, "You listen better than most husbands." "I'm not most husbands," he replied, grinning. They danced slowly in the living room to an old record player humming Ella Fitzgerald. Daniel led awkwardly, and Margaret teased him for his 2 left feet. But there was laughter, real and full, the kind that made a house feel like a home. There were no declarations, no epic love scenes, but their closeness had grown into something far deeper than roles or labels, an unwavering friendship sealed by trust. One winter evening, Margaret asked Daniel to join her by the fire. She wore a thick knit sweater and sipped mint tea while Daniel read beside her. "I need to show you something," she said softly, pulling out an envelope from the drawer beside her chair. It was a will, simple, direct. It left everything, her estate, business holdings, and charitable foundations, to Daniel, but it came with a clause. The foundation must be renamed and repurposed for the working poor, to uplift families like his had been. Daniel stared at the pages, stunned. "I'm not giving you this because I owe you," Margaret said, eyes steady. "I'm giving it to you because I trust you'll do more good with it than I ever could alone." He felt a weight settle in his chest, not of greed but responsibility. "Thank you," he said, "for believing in me. You've always been rich," she smiled, "just not in money." As spring arrived, Margaret's health declined. Her movements slowed, her voice grew softer, but she remained sharp, witty, and deeply present. They spent her last weeks in the garden. Daniel read aloud under the cherry blossoms while she dozed in a wicker chair, her fingers always brushing the hem of his coat like she was afraid he might disappear. One morning she didn't wake up. She lay there in the garden, sunlight dusting her silver hair, a soft smile on her lips. Daniel wept, first in silence, then with the kind of broken sobs that come only when you lose a piece of your soul. But he didn't call the ambulance right away. He sat with her, reading one last chapter from her favorite novel, as the blossoms drifted around them like confetti. Margaret Everleigh's death made national headlines. Only then did the world learn of their unusual marriage, of her anonymous philanthropy, of Daniel's modest background, and of the will that left him everything. The press returned in droves, hungry for scandal. But Daniel remained quiet, dignified. He declined interviews, sold nothing, wore the same clothes, lived in the same house, and when asked by reporters if their relationship had been real, he answered only once, "She gave me everything money can't buy." It shut them up, and earned him a nation's respect. 1 year after Margaret's passing, Daniel opened the Everleigh Foundation. Its mission: to support caregivers, single-parent families, and working students through housing, scholarships, and healthcare aid. He visited every branch personally, shook hands with janitors and CEOs alike, and never let the mission stray from Margaret's original wish: to serve the unseen. The walls of the main office bore her portrait, not as a billionaire, but sitting in the cafe booth, coffee in hand, eyes twinkling with secret joy. Daniel never remarried, but he spoke of her often, not with grief but with reverence. "She was my greatest teacher," he told one room of graduates, "and the first person who ever looked past what I didn't have to see who I was." Years later, Daniel returned to the cafe where it all began. The booth was still there. He sat down, ordered a plain black coffee, and stared out the rain-speckled window. A young barista approached, curious. "You come here often?" he smiled. "I used to, a long time ago." The barista nodded and walked away, but left behind a complimentary slice of cake. Daniel chuckled, a full circle. He looked toward the empty seat across from him and whispered, "Still paying it forward, Margaret." The rain fell gently. His heart felt light, and he finally understood. Love doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it arrives in silence, stays through kindness, and remains long after the world has moved on. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe for more unforgettable tales of love, kindness, and the miracles that grow from quiet moments.